Hi everyone. I hope that you're all staying safe and washing your hands and singing happy birthday twice while you're washing your hands. It is Stephen Sondheim's 90th birthday today, and it's Beverly Knight's 46th birthday today. So if you're looking for anyone to sing happy birthday to whilst you wash your hands, then those would be a good place to start. This video is about the first two chapters of Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. For my students, you have the full text of the book on Microsoft Teams, and for any other students watching, you can find the text online. I'll put a link in the comments. It would be great if you could read the two chapters yourself, so perhaps pause this now and do that, but I'll read them aloud here now, just in case. Chapter 1, My Early Home. The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow with a pond of clear water in it. Some shady trees leaned over it, and rushes and water lilies grew at the deep end. Over the hedge, on one side, we looked into a ploughed field, and on the other, we looked over a gate at our master's house, which stood by the roadside. At the top of the meadow was a grove of fir trees, and at the bottom a running brook overhung by a steep bank. Whilst I was young, I lived upon my mother's milk, as I could not eat grass. In the daytime, I ran by her side, and at night I lay down close by her. When it was hot, we used to stand by the pond in the shade of the trees, and when it was cold, we had a nice warm shed near the grove. As soon as I was old enough to eat grass, my mother used to go out to work in the daytime and come back in the evening. There were 6 young colts in the meadow besides me. They were older than I was. Some were nearly as large as grown-up horses. I used to run with them and had great fun. We used to gallop all together round and round the field as hard as we could go. Sometimes we had rather rough play, for they would frequently bite and kick as well as gallop. One day, when there was a good deal of kicking, my mother whinnied to me to come to her, and then she said, "I wish you to pay attention to what I'm going to say to you. The colts who live here are very good colts, but they are cart-horse colts, and of course they have not learned manners. You have been well-bred and well-born. Your father has a great name in these parts, and your grandfather won the cup 2 years at the Newmarket races. Your grandmother had the sweetest temper of any horse I ever knew, and I think you have never seen me kick or bite. I hope you will grow up gentle and good, and never learn bad ways. Do your work with a good will, lift your feet up well when you trot, and never bite or kick, even in play." I've never forgotten my mother's advice. I knew she was a wise old horse, and our master thought a great deal of her. Her name was Duchess, but he often called her Pet. Our master was a good, kind man. He gave us good food, good lodging, and kind words. He spoke as kindly to us as he did to his little children. We were all fond of him, and my mother loved him very much. When she saw him at the gate, she would neigh with joy and trot up to him. He would pat and stroke her and say, "Well, old pet, how is your little Darkie?" I was a dull black, so he called me Darkie. Then he would give me a piece of bread, which was very good, and sometimes he brought a carrot for my mother. All the horses would come to him, but I think we were his favourites. My mother always took him to the town on a market day in a little gig. There was a ploughboy, Dick, who sometimes came into our field to pluck blackberries from the hedge. When he had eaten all he wanted, he would have what he called fun with the colts, throwing stones and sticks at them to make them gallop. We did not much mind him, for we could gallop off, but sometimes a stone would hit and hurt us. One day he was at this game, and did not know that the master was in the next field, but he was there, watching what was going on. Over the hedge he jumped in a snap, and catching Dick by the arm, he gave him such a box on the ear as made him roar with the pain and surprise. As soon as we saw the master, we trotted up nearer to see what went on. "Bad boy," he said, "bad boy to chase the colts. This is not the first time nor the second, but it shall be the last. There, take your money and go home. I shall not want you on my farm again." So we never saw Dick any more. Old Daniel, the man who looked after the horses, was just as gentle as our master, so we were well off. Chapter 2. The Hunt. Before I was 2 years old, a circumstance happened which I have never forgotten. It was early in the spring. There had been a little frost in the night, and a light mist still hung over the woods and meadows. I and the other colts were feeding at the lower part of the field when we heard, quite in the distance, what sounded like the cry of dogs. The oldest of the colts raised his head, pricked his ears, and said, "There are the hounds," and immediately cantered off, followed by the rest of us to the upper part of the field, where we could look over the hedge and see several fields beyond. My mother and an old riding horse of our master's were also standing near, and seemed to know all about it. "They have found a hare," said my mother, "and if they come this way, we shall see the hunt." And soon the dogs were all tearing down the field of young wheat next to ours. I never heard such a noise as they made. They did not bark, nor howl, nor whine, but kept on a yo, yo, oh, oh, yo, yo, oh, oh, at the top of their voices. After them came a number of men on horseback, some of them in green coats, all galloping as fast as they could. The old horse snorted and looked eagerly after them, and we young colts wanted to be galloping with them, but they were soon away into the fields lower down. Here it seemed as if they had come to a stand. The dogs left off barking and ran about every way with their noses to the ground. "They have lost the scent," said the old horse. "Perhaps the hare will get off." "What hare?" I said. "Oh, I don't know what hare. Likely enough it may be one of our own hares out of the woods. Any hare they can find will do for the dogs and men to run after." And before long the dogs began their yo, yo, oh, oh again, and back they came all together at full speed, making straight for our meadow at the part where the high bank and hedge overhang the brook. "Now we shall see the hare," said my mother, and just then a hare, wild with fright, rushed by and made for the woods. On came the dogs. They burst over the bank, leapt over the stream, and came dashing across the field, followed by the huntsman. 6 or 8 men leapt their horses clean over, close upon the dogs. The hare tried to get through the fence. It was too thick, and she turned sharp around to make for the road, but it was too late. The dogs were upon her with their wild cries. We heard one shriek, and that was the end of her. One of the huntsmen rode up and whipped off the dogs, who would soon have torn her to pieces. He held her up by the leg, torn and bleeding, and all the gentlemen seemed well pleased. As for me, I was so astonished that I did not at first see what was going on by the brook. But when I did look, there was a sad sight. 2 fine horses were down. One was struggling in the stream, and the other was groaning on the grass. One of the riders was getting out of the water, covered with mud. The other lay quite still. "His neck is broken," said my mother. "And serve him right, too," said one of the colts. I thought the same, but my mother did not join in with us. "Well, no," she said, "you must not say that. But though I am an old horse, and have seen and heard a great deal, I never yet could make out why men are so fond of this sport. They often hurt themselves, often spoil good horses, and tear up the fields, and all for a hare or a fox or a stag that they could get more easily some other way. But we are only horses, and don't know." While my mother was saying this, we stood and looked on. Many of the riders had gone to the young man, but my master, who had been watching what was going on, was the first to raise him. His head fell back, and his arms hung down, and everyone looked very serious. There was no noise now. Even the dogs were quiet, and seemed to know that something was wrong. They carried him to our master's house. I heard afterwards that it was young George Gordon, the squire's only son, a fine, tall young man, and the pride of his family. There was now riding off in all directions to the doctor's, to the farrier's, and no doubt to Squire Gordon's, to let him know about his son. When Mr. Bond, the farrier, came to look at the black horse that lay groaning on the grass, he felt him all over, and shook his head. One of his legs was broken. Then someone ran to our master's house, and came back with a gun. Presently there was a loud bang, and a dreadful shriek, and then all was still. The black horse moved no more. My mother seemed much troubled. She said she had known that horse for years, and that his name was Rob Roy. He was a good, bold horse, and there was no vice in him. She would never go to that part of the field afterwards. Not many days after, we heard the church bell tolling for a long time, and looking over the gate, we saw a long, strange black coach that was covered with black cloth and was drawn by black horses. After that came another, and another, and another, and all were black, while the bell kept tolling, tolling. They were carrying young Gordon to the churchyard to bury him. He would never ride again. What they did with Rob Roy I never knew, but 'twas all for one little hare. Okay, that was the first 2 chapters there. So what is this book basically about so far? It seems to be about a young horse, and so far he's called Darkie, so we'll use that name for him for now. He's with his mother, and the horses obviously have relationships with each other, and they have relationships with the humans as well. I think that what we'll do is we'll focus on the relationships between the horses and the humans for now. So I'd like you to do a few things for me written down. Firstly, using quotes, I'd like you to explain the relationship between the horses and the man Darkie calls our master. For example, you might write, Darkie says that his master is a, quote, good, kind man. This shows that Darkie thinks his master treats the horses well. It also shows that the master was probably in a position of power, because being kind shows that he probably could have acted unkindly in his position. He had the power to act unkindly. Okay, so use the quote and then explain what the quote means. Okay. Secondly, using quotes, I would like you to explain the relationship between the horses and Dick, the ploughboy, who was throwing the stones at them and the sticks. Thirdly, using quotes, I would like you to explain the horse's reaction to the hunt. Darkie's mother, Duchess reacts quite differently to the other horses. So it would be good to explain explain her reaction and explain their reaction separately, the others. After that, I'd like you to think, not writing, just thinking about the funeral. At George Gordon's funeral, the hearse is pulled by black horses. It seems important that the horses are black because the humans want everything at the funeral to be black. I'd like you to think about that and think about the horse who also died in the hunt. How differently the two are treated, and how does that influence your understanding of the relationship between humans and horses? When a human dies, what happens and how a horse is involved? When a horse dies, what happens and how a human is involved? You notice that it was a human that pulled the trigger in the case of Rob Roy's death. As a final thought, for those of you who are targeting higher levels, such as level 6, I'd like you to have a think about what Sewell is doing here as an author. She's telling the story through the eyes of a character, Darkie, who seems so far not to understand the relationship between humans and animals very well. However, she's still managing to give the reader a good understanding of that relationship. So basically, the reader actually knows more than the character through which the story is being told. I want you to think about how she's managed to do that, and you can write that one down. Okay, I'm going to write out the questions that I've just been through that I want you to answer, and I'm going to put them into the comments. Let me know how you get on. Stay safe, wash your hands. Stephen Sondheim and Beverly Knight, they're the ones to sing happy birthday to. Okay, thanks.